Welcome to APA's sixth town hall on COVID-19. My name is Billy Zadig, Standards and Codes Administrator. Allow me to review a couple housekeeping items before we start. All attendees are in listen-only mode. We ask that you utilize the chat box for the Q&A segment today. While we attempt to respond to all questions submitted, should we run out of time, responses will be posted to APA's COVID-19 RAQ Recently Asked Questions webpage. We also remind participants to ensure their speaker volume levels are set for your comfort. Our speakers are gathering us from across the continent, and as such, varying volumes will be present. Today's session will award professional continuing education credits as well as ISDs and AIA CLUs. For certificates, please email me at Billie, B-I-L-L-I-E, @apa.org, along with your AIA membership. Our webinar recording will be posted to APA's website later this afternoon. Additionally, you'll receive a follow-up email within 72 hours providing a designated link for all webinar recordings as well as information on upcoming webinars and town halls. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Lander Medlin, APA's Executive Vice President, your moderator for today. Lander, take it away.
Thank you, Billy, and welcome everyone. We appreciate your engagement in these town hall meetings as we further explore the impact of COVID-19 on our facilities organizations. I'd like to thank both our regular participants, I see regulars, and any new folks who decided to join us today. Our prior town halls have been recorded along with the answers to all your questions and posted to the APA COVID-19 website resource center. It is constantly being updated, so please return regularly. Our town hall meetings do occur every Friday at this time with a different target and focus. Hint, next week's Space, a Very New Frontier. Again, thanks for joining the dialogue. We really want your questions. That's what makes this a rich conversation and the special community that we share. So post them at any time. We are so pleased that we have the opportunity for this town hall to be able to collaborate with NACUBO, the National Association of College and University Business Officers, and have CABO connect us with one of their premier institutions, the University of Alberta. At the end of last week's town hall and my Monday morning message this week, I said, the impact is unmistakably broad. We don't know what the world is going to look like. And although this is an ever-changing crisis, we must embrace flexibility, a willingness to quickly adapt and readapt, and focus time and attention on the implications to and scenarios for our institutional operations this coming academic year and thereafter. Well, that's clearly why we chose this topic today. Impact of COVID-19, the higher education, financial situation, and futures. I have these three panelists that have joined me, which I'm very excited about. They will help us understand what's coming at us from our larger economies, the macro level, the impact on higher education institutions, then facilities critical response. So here's the format for today's town hall. I'll provide an introduction to set the context, introduce our stellar panel, who will provide some opening framing remarks, and then we'll get right to the Q&A, as I know you've got many questions to ask this exceptional panel. I'll conclude with a call for images, available resources, save the date, and some brief closing remarks. I've opened each town hall with a compare and contrast of the coronavirus statistics. Yesterday, and I take a deep breath and a sigh, the US marked 870,000 cases, 50,000 deaths alone. 1 month ago, on March 26, there were 85,500 cases. Do you see the difference? 1,300 deaths just 1 month ago. And 2 months ago, there were only 200 cases. That's on March 5, and 0 deaths. We are still far from the end of the effects of the coronavirus spread. With respect to Canada, which is 12th on the world's list. The US is first, not the place we want to be. They were at 43,286 cases and 2,241 deaths as of yesterday. They're doing a great job in addressing this, and today we'll hear about some of their successes. Although we are pleased, the number of cases look as though they have peaked in a few of the states. New York and the state of Washington have announced that the exponential rate and pace remains. We must think differently about what we do and how we do it. This will be especially important for our institutional response to a recovery and reopening. And as you will hear today, the changes to our industry are also occurring at an exponential rate and pace. Let's look at a few other numbers that will provide the context for our panel's discussion today. So 97% of the population in the United States remains under stay-at-home or shelter-at-home orders, but that changes today and into this weekend. For a handful of states, Georgia opens up today. Scary at best, especially since we have been getting such positive confirmation that social physical distancing is working. And we now know that the number of confirmed coronavirus cases is just the tip of the iceberg, that a large percentage of the population remains susceptible. Frankly, I'm concerned for our essential frontline workers, both in our communities and on our campuses. Again, the simple but powerful mantra, use your head, stop the spread. Why do states want to reopen almost no matter what? Simple. It's the impact on the economy. Yes, we hit another historic milestone yesterday, cresting 26 million people in the United States who applied for unemployment benefits. That's close to 15% of the US workforce. Retail sales were down 8.7%, hasn't happened since 1992. Every financial indicator is shaky. But worse yet, it's what's happening as a result. A humanitarian food crisis, for sure. We must realize we all need to come together. We're all in this together. And finally, the next unimaginable nightmare lurks around the corner. Read any headline from the Chronicle of Higher Education, Inside Higher Ed, The Atlantic, New York Times, McKinsey & Company, and Deloitte. Things like colleges are already deciding whether to reopen in the fall. Major cost cutting begins. How will the pandemic change higher education? The hard choices presidents will have to make. Coronavirus, how should the United States higher education plan for an uncertain future? We're there. The challenges are real, yet we must now shift our thinking to what happens next. And these will be unprecedented decisions. Close, stay online, slow transition, hybrid approach, full reopen. When do we decide? Then how? And how will facilities respond? Are we prepared? Do we even know what the questions are? There's no one-size-fits-all solution. The challenges are real, hence our panel today, each speaking to the shifting landscape, providing possibilities and opportunities to the fluidity that is COVID-19. Let's start first with Jim Hundrieser, inaugural Vice President for Consulting Services with NACUBO. At NACUBO, Jim is providing higher education institutions with new strategies to match ambition with action, focusing on revenue growth, building capacity, providing pragmatic solutions, and conducting operational assessments. Over his 30-year career in higher education, Jim has served in a variety of roles, from an institutional vice president to consultant to faculty member to residence hall director. The core of Jim's work has been focused on providing ways for students to gain access to and succeed in higher education. Prior to joining NACUBO, Jim served the Association of Governing Boards, AGB, focusing on institutional sustainability with strategies to grow, partner, or build strategic business models. Jim has spent his career in higher education serving as an institutional vice president at 2 private and 1 public university. Titles such as Vice President for Enrollment and Student Affairs at Plymouth State, Vice President of Student Development at Lynn University, then Vice President for Student Affairs and Enrollment Management at Marymount Manhattan College. Jim holds a BS degree from Northern Michigan University, an MEd from Plymouth State University, and a PhD in leadership and education from Barry University. He will address the unimaginable challenges facing higher education institutions' business model, how the landscape has significantly shifted, identify a few scenarios we should be preparing for, the importance of supporting student admissions, address various enrollment revenue models, and possible facilities opportunities at this juncture. You will find a plethora of tabletop exercises amidst the questions suggested. We are thrilled to have Jim join our town hall panel today. Jim?
Thanks, Lander. Welcome, everyone. So great to be with you and so appreciative of the partnership between NACUBO and APA. I'd first like to start off just by saying thank you. Thanks for all the good work you're doing. No one that I know of could have ever imagined something as significant as what we're experiencing. And know that on behalf of students, I'm so appreciative of the work that you're doing to help your campuses remain healthy and safe, and thinking about the long-term strategy as we move through this unforeseeable time. So on the next slide, we were in the midst of a bunch of change pre-COVID. If you are not aware, demographic shifts were happening dramatically. And what was most interesting were probably, we've been talking about the Midwest or Northeast demographic shifts, but the two things that we haven't talked much about is the urban centers and international students. More and more students are seeking urban experiences. We don't know why exactly, other than it is calling them to be a part of larger, bigger, more robust institutions. That has put great pressure on smaller private institutions throughout the US. In addition, the international market continues to remain incredibly unpredictable. That was pre-COVID. Now think about how different that will be as we move past this into a different iteration. I am hearing that some institutions are talking about planning for 50% less of their international students, just from the sheer fact that we may not allow students from those countries to enter into our country because of the disease that is worldwide linked to this. But pre this, we were still unclear on where were our shifts going to be with international students. We know that China is expanding their internal capacity to serve more students in the hundreds of thousands, with one estimate saying that there will be 1 million more classroom seats for Chinese students within the country. Those were ones that we were happily welcoming to our campuses. So that's a huge shift. The second is the net tuition revenues. Revenue is down for the most part, public and private institutions. Public, some of that funding is down because of less state appropriation and because of the competition. More are competing for students and giving scholarships that they never gave before, leading to net tuition revenues that are less. And the third thing complicating our world is the Generation Z. This generation is overconnected and overwhelmed. And as you're probably watching and observing, you're looking to expand counseling centers, mental health opportunities, health service areas, all those things that our students are saying they need and want at dramatic fashion. I remember talking with a school in November that had said they had doubled their mental health staff, and by the third week of the semester, all of their staff were already at what they considered to be capacity levels of how they can serve students. So, so even pre-COVID, all this was changing. And on the next slide, I was often asked, where do we see higher ed going? Where do you see it moving? And I would respond back to probably by 2025, 2030, we will see a model that is much less campus-based and much more fluid or flexible. Based off of what I've seen in the last 30 days, 60 days, I'm wondering if this model won't be the future in 10 to 12 months from now. So while I think many, particularly those of you at big public institutions or flagship institutions, your campus-based residential experience was core to who you were. Now, as more pressure is going to be applied to can students afford it? They liked being online. They enjoyed the flexibility of being online. The need to be competitive in a job market that may be very slow to recover. We still don't know what will that mean for our pathway of students for the future? And as we think about that, I wonder, will the associate's degree become the common standard? And then will students really begin to explore other options by gaining credentials, starting their career, or earning some skills and knowledge where they gain competency-based credits? Through that, they then earn more certificates. They do hands-on apprenticeship work. And all of that leads to an ebb and flow to a campus where they're face-to-face, they're online, they're on a site, they're on a location, they're back again. Much more fluidity, making much more difficult ways for us to predict budgets, to predict usage, to predict space usage, to predict what facilities will need to look like. And again, I was saying that out to 2025, 28, maybe 2030. Now, this may be amplified up to 2025 at best. It may be within 12 months, we may find that a third of our students really like this online experience, or the fear factor for them to return gets them settled into an institution that has much more robust online education. They do that for next year and they say, hey, this is working and saving us a bunch of money. How do we continue to move forward? So that's a little snapshot on kind of where we were heading. And then COVID occurs. And on the next slide, as you are well aware, we were underprepared. HR systems were overwhelmed. Students, I've heard from many of you, left behind a mess, certainly for students who were far away from campus, some who flew home for spring break, and parents said, bring everything you can with you. I talked to one VP for Student Affairs who said about a third of her students, they're very out of state. About half their students are from out of state. About a third of those students' families just called and said, just throw it all out. And I just kept thinking about the burden that put on to all of our physical plant and facilities people, and trying to ensure safety of the staff. We are also seeing the governance rules no longer apply. We never considered what would happen if we were to really close down. Even though we did tabletop exercises, we sure didn't do them in this way, nor did we plan for this massive loss of revenue. We are very concerned at NACUBO about how much the states are beginning to report in their lost tax revenues and what those implications are for students and for institutions. And now when we start to add on athletic losses and summer losses, this begins to become uncomprehendable. I've now been talking with many institutions about what is the impact of no football in the fall. And for those top 500 institutions that have strong football teams, and certainly those top 200 institutions that are making millions of dollars, I talked with one school that said football brings in about $9.4 million in revenue, and that pays for about 7 additional sports, both men's and women's sports. Without football, how will they fund those programs? And there was this question of, they weren't all sports, and so how will they do that? How will that operate? And what's the impact of that for you? If your stadiums are closed, those are a lot of staff that you have on hire to do these events, manage them, do those types of things. What does that mean for our future? And then, of course, the technology pieces. Technology worked, it didn't work. Our learning management systems were tested in great ways. We're hearing many people talk about faculty struggling through. Most did well, some really challenged on that, so struggling with that. And it has led to more people questioning, do they need a face-to-face experience? So get everything you've heard in that. And so as we start to think about the future, on the next slide, we're thinking about, how are you preparing for this? Are you thinking through 3 scenarios? Scenario 1 is the virus is contained, but our business model is going to remain, but maybe at 20% less revenue. Again, if we take athletics out of that, maybe that's a slightly different model depending on your institution, but the impacts are real. What are the risk management processes you're putting in place, the staffing prevention activities that you're putting into place? I am hearing about more staff doing these 12-hour split shifts, on for 7 days, off for 2 weeks, on for this, off for that, using residence hall space to keep people on campus if they want to support their families. What if all the students are back, but yet the virus is still contained but out there? What are the actions that need to remain in an awfully stressed time? Then what happens if the virus is contained, but then there's a resurgence? And this, of course, is what we're talking about most. The business model, again, will be altered. Campuses might reclose. So we've opened, we've brought them all back. Now we close. We have to give money back again to students for tuition this time, maybe, or for room and board again. How will we manage that with furloughs, layoffs, and then let's say it only closes for, we open for 4 weeks, everybody goes home for the month of October, and we reopen again. How is that constant scenario planning you're putting into place that is there? Or the worst, right? No containment until a vaccine or a treatment is found. Our business model is shattered. All of our online courses, all of our classes move to online. And we really do move to a whole different model that for many of you, and I know some of you are doing this now, your labs are reopening to support efforts on vaccines or prevention or antibody testing or whatever that might be. I've watched some of you open up your residence halls for emergency staff, first responders, lead people. But how are we then going to communicate this out to parents and families? So, you've gotten great press under the guise of that you've been helping out and supporting your communities, which we want you to do. And then I'm wondering about how many mothers and fathers in the background saying, my child is not going to live in that residence hall anymore because that's where all those people lived who were fully exposed to the virus. And you've got a shared centralized HVAC system. You've got shared services, common area bathrooms, all those types of things where we might really be challenged. And as we think about the bigger challenge on the next slide is about admissions. If I had one crystal ball that I could give you, boy, do I wish I could tell you what are we going to, how many students will come back, who will sign up. We are hearing that deposits are staying steady. I am hearing that the mid-sized regional institutions, some of them are seeing surges in their deposits. This doesn't surprise me, I think, because of the opportunity for people to be closer to home. What I do worry about is, are they double depositing? So are they depositing at the mid-sized regional public because that's close to home, but their dream institution is 200, 300, 500 miles away? They've also deposited there to hold their space. So I think there's opportunities, but I also think there are questions that as people are considering these options, 3 things that I would pose to you all to be thinking about as you help your admissions office. The first is, I think as spring comes for many of us, more families are going to get more nudgy, and they are going to say, hey, we never made it to campus for that open house or that accepted student day or that tour. What does a self-guided campus tour look like on your campus that is safe, that mitigates as much risk as possible? How do you train campus police, housekeeping, maintenance staff, who may be the only people on campus and the only interaction with the prospective family, as they have much more flexibility in their schedules for states and areas where we begin to take off the restrictions in place. As I live in New York, in Washington, D.C., and I do see families out for walks by themselves in the evening hours. And I wonder, will a family think, well, if we go to campus, we'll only be outside, we'll stay by ourselves, we will socially distance from others. What if on a nice day in 2 weeks, 200 families decide it's a beautiful Saturday, let's drive to your institution and just do a walk around? How are you prepared for that and the possibilities of that? And can you mitigate some of that through video tours? We've certainly seen a lot of that looking up, but you know your facilities better than anyone. And probably the admissions team doesn't know places where you might want to be partnering with them to stage some prime spaces to get an inside look for prospective students to see the insides of these buildings, see what happens in them, even though you can't simulate student experiences. How can you help your admissions teams with that? How can you give it some school spirit, give it some feel, give it some care, give it some opportunity? And how are you portraying a message that you are welcome? I think when we think about those training opportunities or people roaming around, or even as we're preparing to open up, how are you preparing that you are ready, available, have taken all the updates that you need to, protocols are in place, and that we're seeing a level of customer service? I'm thinking about move-in days and how dumpsters are packed. And I can even recall in my life thinking about staff myself included, standing in a dumpster trying to smash it down because so many boxes and other things had come out from move-in days. Well, I don't know about you, I'm not getting in a dumpster anymore. So how are we preparing for those types of things as we think about opening? Because the next slide talks a little bit about the enrollment model. And as we think about that enrollment model, we don't know, are most going to return, will half return, or will we have staggered starts and stops? Any of these are possible depending on where we're at with the virus. I think of greater concern is the residence halls, for those of you with residence halls and laboratory space, common areas. What will your student union look like? What will your lab spaces look like? How will you be cleaning them at a capacity or a rate that you've never done before? And potentially you only have half of your funding available. So you've got to do all this extra stuff and only half of the funding is available. Or even worse is you're online for 4 weeks, you move in, students all come, they only stay for 8, they go home for the last 4. That means you've lost half of your room and board dollars. What do you do in those types of things as we look for models? And on the next slide, we consider what are those revenue losses. And as you can see, in some of these are just scenarios that I'm hearing you all talk about. How are you planning? How are you thinking through these dollars? In addition, even though the market has remained stronger than we had expected, most institutions took somewhere between a 20 and 25% hit in their endowment. That has crept back up to being a 10, 12, 14, 15% loss, depending on how your risk vulnerabilities were. But there is a loss that'll already be on your books for this year linked to that. Now we'll have revenue models that are changing as well. So those are some thoughts as we click to the last slide, just a couple of concluding thoughts of revenue and where we're heading. But I'd ask you also, how are you taking advantage of this closure? I know many of you have announced that you are putting on hold large scale projects, and I've seen more of that in the last 5 days. Lander, when you talked about how fast things were changing, we talked about this last week. We didn't see as much of that just in 7 days. We've seen institution after institution say we're holding up on large scale projects for this next year. But how are you thinking about those low cost projects that can get done, that can get spruced up while you've got staff, time, opportunities? Also, how are you thinking about partial project completions, knowing that you might get stuck? I'm hearing a lot more talking about energy savings projections. What are those going to be? How do those link to the future of other costs that we've had to ensure? So how are you taking advantage of this cost? And on the last slide before I turn it back over is, how are you thinking about being a part of the solution? I know many of you are, but how are you really thinking about solutions, communicating that to your if you're not on the cabinet or to the president, how are you thinking through how do you document? Families are going to be, there is no more precious asset to a parent than their child. Their safety is going to be first. How are you thinking through that safety and helping the cabinet, the admissions team, the provost, helping them understand that you're working within the mission structure and resources to provide solutions, and that you can be ready awfully quick. We may still be at August 1st saying, we're not sure, we're hoping to be open, or we're open, August 1st comes and we say, oh, nope, we're only going to do half. How are you preparing for those types of scenarios, and how are you conveying the confidence that you are ready to help and be a solution partner in the system? So there's some thoughts. Hopefully those do lead to some good tabletop exercises. Happy to take questions when we get to that phase in the program. Appreciate being a part of this presentation.
Jim, thank you so much. One thing is clear, the uncertainties have widened and that you have given us so much to think about. And as we talked together as a team earlier this week, we recognize that one of the values of this town hall is giving people the questions they need to be asking, the concerns they need to be addressing, and the scenarios that they should be focused on with their team and facilities, but the larger institutional team. I really liked that you talked about the partnership with the enrollment side, with admissions, with that entire team on the student affairs side. More than ever before, that collaboration is key. And interesting, APA will have a thought leaders symposium monograph coming out called Preparing for the Student of 2024. Now, was that on top of it or what?
Very impressive, very impressive.
Yeah, and so that was our topic. We were collaborating with admissions and enrollment managers and looking at the data, and now we're looking at the data again and the information so that we can have a monograph that speaks to now COVID, post-COVID, and the partnership was really critical. And so you just highlighted it for us, and I'm very, very pleased about that. So we will go to questions later. Let's talk now. Let's bring on Bill Paulus, who is the Associate Vice President for Facilities Management, University of Minnesota. Bill has served in this role for 4 years, previously 14 years at the UMNTC campus. Prior, he spent 14 years with Honeywell, and get this, in aerospace and industrial polyester manufacturing, and 4 years with Westinghouse in DOE's nuclear waste processing facility startup. What a background. Bill holds a BSME degree from the University of Dayton and an MBA from the University of North Carolina. Bill will provide strategic considerations utilizing the Kaplan-Norton Balanced Scorecard method across the 4 perspectives of finance, customer, process, and employee. We'll identify constructive University of Minnesota examples that you will find quite portable. We'll recognize the fluid nature of our times and a demonstrated understanding of the very real underlying stress, pressure, and emotions surrounding it all. Bill's examples will be immediately transferable as tabletop suggestions. Let's welcome our next panelist. Bill?
Thank you, Lander. As Lander mentioned, I'm the AVP for Facilities Management at the Twin Cities campus, which is the largest of the 5-campus system at the University of Minnesota. Our system also includes campuses in Duluth, Morris, Crookston, and Rochester. Before I begin, I'd like to quick thank you to Lander and all of the APA staff for your work to keep us informed and networked throughout the year. Also, a quick shout out to our APA president, Ruth Ann Manlett, who you all know is a Minnesota Gopher. We're very proud of her accomplishments and appreciate her leadership in APA. For my portion of today's town hall, I'd like to talk about an approach to address both strategic considerations and tactical implications based on the challenges ahead of us, given the landscape that Jim just presented. I'll also provide several specific examples of actions we've taken or are planning to take at the University of Minnesota as a reference for your consideration. I often use the Kaplan and Norton Balanced Scorecard method to frame our strategic discussions, with just a few adaptations for our use. If you're not familiar with that framework, it includes the 4 perspectives of financial, customer, process, and people. I'm assuming most facilities organizations will have financial targets provided to you by your institutional leadership. For most businesses, financial goals are usually set to create shareholder value. Financial goals are met by satisfying customer needs. Customer needs are met by executing work processes. Work processes are delivered by employees who are trained, equipped, and engaged. Today, I'll speak mostly about the process, but with a full understanding that the impact to people is the difficult, emotional, and stressful part of our work. First, the financial perspective. I found it to be very important to stay connected to our institution's financial officers and budgeting process, and now to understand the revised budgeting process. I expect you all are tied into this already, but if not, proactively ask what is expected of your department in terms of financial impact. Your institution may not have specific targets for you yet, but it will be helpful for you if you can establish at least a range, say 1 to 5%, or worse, 5 to 10%. A few Minnesota examples. Our fiscal 21 budget was set in November, including the budget reductions as we have every year. Like many of you, our fiscal year runs July 1st through the following June. The budget office will now be setting new targets for our fiscal 21 budget, including some contingency planning, In fact, I'll be receiving our new targets next week. Our baseline is the scenario of campus reopening as usual for the fall semester. The two contingency scenarios are reopening mid-semester, say October, or not reopening until the spring semester, as in January 2021. These have very different financial impacts to the institution and also to our departmental budgets. For us in FM, we're also right now starting to look at our budgets for fiscal year 22. This is the year starting in June of 21. The Minnesota State Legislature operates on a biennium, and FY22 begins that next 2-year period. I'm equally concerned, probably more so, about FY22 as I am about next year's budget reductions. We'll be developing scenarios over the next 6 months or so to prepare for anticipated reductions for fiscal 22. Cutting budgets is easy if you're not concerned about the service levels you provide, or the impact to your campus equipment or infrastructure, or the impact to your employees. Obviously, that's not the case. We're all very concerned about those impacts. I found that the balanced scorecard structure helps keep me on track to think and plan more intentionally and comprehensively. Second perspective is customers, or I'll say campus impact. Here I'd suggest build on your relationships that you already have across the campus to really understand your customers' pressure points and expectations. Think broadly of the different stakeholders you support: academic, learning, delivery methods, student recruitment, orientation, classroom management, research, community needs, auxiliaries, athletics, and so on. Review your current service level agreements. By that I mean what services your customers are getting for the costs they are paying. You'll want a good baseline understanding of your current delivery model to be able to communicate what is being changed and how this will vary from past service delivery. Don't assume your customer base widely understands the services you are funded to provide. I found that despite working at the university for 20 years, some of our customers do not really understand the services they should expect for the cost pool they're paying into. If you don't have a documented service level standard, now is a good time to create one. Correlating services to funding at a detailed level will be a useful tool for you and worth the time to create. A few Minnesota examples. At the Twin Cities campus, we have a designated facility lead for every college and major unit on campus. This collegiate facility lead is assigned by the dean and is organizationally part of the college. I meet with this group of roughly 50 people every month or so throughout the year. We also have a designated departmental facility rep for each of the 650 or so departments on campus. This structure has served us well over the years and has enabled us to stay engaged with our customers. Over the past month, we've been working with the VP of Research to have every active lab place a sign at their door stating the PPE needed to enter that space and the PI contact information. We're also working with the research leads at our university and our University of Health and Safety function for the process to reactivate additional labs, which we anticipate starting in the next couple of months. One more example on the energy management and utility side. In coordination with our building contacts, we're now accelerating some utility projects like electrical switchgear PMs, as well as LED lighting retrofits and building control upgrades to achieve energy conservation. These projects are, of course, less disruptive while buildings are vacant, and we're very fortunate to be in a situation where we have the resources to perform this work. The third, the process perspective. Usually the process perspective is the process of executing work. Today I'm going to speak about the process to meet new budget targets. Here I suggest you create a process model to concurrently analyze revenues, expenses, service levels, and customer expectations. Leverage your current relationships and methods of working. Don't try to figure this out on your own. Depending upon where you are in the process improvement curve, you may or may not have continuous improvement opportunities already identified or implemented. As Don Guckert and others at APA have mentioned in leadership presentations, we can't just do the same with less resources anymore. We need to work differently. Be good at what's important and be willing to stop doing those things that are less important and are not funded. Be exceedingly transparent to your university leadership about the correlation between funding, service levels, and impacts to the campus aesthetics, equipment, infrastructure, employee engagement, and so on. It may not result in you getting more funding, but focus on alignment between funding and service levels. Be realistic on what can be accomplished. A few University of Minnesota examples. During a budget challenge we had in 2008 and 2009, our FM department was asked to take a significant budget reduction right at the same time as we were correcting a structural budget deficit. The result was a reduction of over $18 million in our annual funding to our operations and maintenance functions. This impacted management levels, maintenance, custodial, waste management, grounds programs, really everything within the department was impacted. The approach we used then is one I plan to repeat for our upcoming budget challenge. For each of your business lines, again, custodial, maintenance, grounds, construction, utilities, charge a small group to build a set of proposed changes that would yield reductions well above your target level. If you anticipate a 5 to 10% reduction, charge the team to provide up to 20% reductions, again, including the impact of those changes. Even if all the proposals are not implemented, and hopefully they are not, setting an aggressive goal for your planning purposes encourages a paradigm shift in thinking, not just a tightening of the belt. If you have access to any benchmarking data, that may help you also focus on where you are not as efficient as your peer group. We've used Gordian sightlines for years and have found that to be helpful. Otherwise, some sample topics you may consider. If you can get to your budget target by simply trimming expenses, overtime, this sort of thing, great, you can leave it at that. If the cuts are deeper, you'll be thinking about process streamlining, organizational restructuring, changing or considering to change the frequency of the service you provide, looking at outsourcing or insourcing options. What are those things you can simply stop doing? Services to stop performing, or services you can perform but differently. Another example, looking at outsourcing opportunities. At the Twin Cities campus, we saved over $500,000 annually by creating one consolidated campus-wide elevator contract for our 400 elevators and escalators. This is a shared contract between FM, athletics, housing, parking, and student unions. I bring up this example to highlight that this budget crisis may provide an opportunity to reduce silos between departments on campus for a better campus-wide solution. One more example. Consider options to partner with other units on your campus. In our case, FM transitioned many of our materials management or stores functions to an internal unit we call U-Market. They're now responsible for inventorying, ordering, and stocking all of our custodial supply closets. This eliminates that responsibility from our custodial supervisors, allowing them to focus on managing employees, walking the campus, or perhaps for you, creates an option to not backfill a supervisor position that becomes vacant. We also reduced expenses by this same partnership with U-Market for maintenance part procurement by creating one central campus storeroom and providing a phone-in order desk for maintenance and part procurement. These silos existed within the FM department. Prior to this, we had 5 separate storerooms in FM, each one managed by its own storeroom clerk. The last perspective, the fourth perspective, is people. The safety of our workers and working conditions on campus is certainly a top priority for all of us. For these, you'll of course have to follow your institution's guidance on return to work or working from home policies. As another example, we're still evaluating the requirements for wearing masks when the campus returns to normal operations. When we started our reduced operations back in March, where only essential employees were coming to campus, we advised our employees they should follow the governor's guidance to voluntarily wear cloth masks. We are now planning to provide masks to all FM employees who request them. Also, we're working with our medical school and campus medical community to create area-specific guidance for cleaning frequencies and protocols when the campus returns to normal. Another suggestion, be cognizant of your union contracts and engage HR and union reps. Our campus is currently deploying a rotational work assignment where some employees work 1 week and then are off for 2 or even 3 weeks. This rotation does not consider seniority because of individual training, access, and experience needed in certain buildings. Our union contacts were very understanding and cooperative as we created this new rotation cycle. We're also working closely with our trades unions to keep as many construction trades working as possible through our reduced operations. As a result, most of our construction projects are continuing on schedule. Where possible, push for longer time horizons for budget reductions to allow for attrition to play out, even over a multi-year time horizon if you can. A clear plan is needed to sell this approach to your campus leadership. In our case, we reduced approximately 80 custodial workers with no layoffs in 2009 by allowing for attrition to reduce headcount over about a 1-year period. This was right before we reorganized the custodial crews into a team cleaning structure, which required less staff to manage the workload. Lastly, on the people perspective, communication, always important. As an example, at the University of Minnesota, I send out a biweekly email to all FM staff and many of our service partners, about 1,400 people. During the campus reduced operations, emails were sent out as needed, sometimes twice a week, providing specific interpretation of the messages from university leadership. Our staff were often unclear on how to interpret the high-level messages and wanted clarity on how it impacted them personally. We also post key messages in break rooms for employees who are less comfortable with email communication. In summary, the Twin Cities FM department has been on a journey to create a culture of continuous improvement that has taken years to build. Understand that it can take time for your employees and customers to adjust, not to just a new way of working, but to a new way of evaluating how you will do your work. In these trying and difficult times, there may also be some opportunities. For some of you, this may be an opportune time to push the envelope on changing the culture, to streamline your operations and integrate more closely with your campus constituents. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions and our time online today.
Bill, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And, you know, I was struck by, again, collaboration is key. You have so many partnerships and relationships that you have developed over time that are serving you well. Identifying that a clear plan is essential, and those relationships give you credibility. You've built trust over time. Another thing I was struck by is the willingness to stop doing things and assessing accordingly by focusing on the alignment with funding and service levels, and then a new way of evaluating everything. Really good examples that we can all use. We have definitely got questions coming for all of you. I want to move now to, and I'm very excited about, our colleague from Canada. Andrew Sharman is the Vice President for Facilities and Operations at the University of Alberta. Andrew leads the Facilities and Operations portfolio that provides services to all 5 units of the University of Alberta's campus on ancillary services, operations and maintenance, planning and project delivery, utilities, and strategic portfolio services. He brings a deep and broad experience from the public sector, working with Alberta Health Services and the former Capital Health in a number of senior leadership roles. You're going to see how that plays out when he, in a little bit. In 2013, he was appointed Deputy Secretary to Cabinet and Deputy Clerk of Executive Council, working for 3 successive premiers. Most recently, he served as Assistant Deputy Minister of the Health and Government Facilities Division with Alberta Infrastructure. Andrew has a MS degree of Defense Logistics Management, graduated from the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, and spent 22 years in the British Army, where he specialized, get this, in explosive safety for a number of years, including tours in Northern Ireland and Bosnia as a counter-terrorist bomb disposal operator. Wow. He will provide his approach to the executive lead role for the entire institution's response to COVID-19 and how they are addressing coronavirus transmission. The differences in provincial handling of COVID-19 in Canada from those in the US, address enrollment challenges and the funding limitations pre-COVID and the impact now and through recovery. He'll address various facilities and residential issues as a result and pose some resultant relevant questions to space use and configurations for social physical distancing that will certainly prompt good tabletop exercises moving forward. We certainly have an explosive situation and a perfect panelist for us to hear from today. Andrew?
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the introduction. A Brit in Canada, but that's another story. So the University of Alberta, as Landa referenced, we have 5 campuses spread across Alberta, 41,000 students, 12,000 staff, 3,400 courses and 7,800 sections. We're a research-intensive university, and we're part of what is known as the University 15 in Canada. And as a result, we do stay very well connected. So my role is likely fairly unique, that a facilities lead is heading up the entire institutional response. So I was appointed on the 1st of March by the President as the institution's executive lead for our COVID-19 public health response. I have full responsibility for operations and all current and future planning for the whole institution. As a result, I wanted to ensure that I had credibility with our academics and our deans. So I made sure we had a very diverse operations team, but I also included some key academic folks, the Dean of Students, the University Registrar. I reached out to 2 key deans for representatives from their teams, and I also have the Dean of Graduate Studies as one of my advisors. So I am going to approach today slightly differently because of the different experience I'm having. So to oversee this, we have a crisis management team, which is at level 3, and we created planning teams for academic impacts, research impacts, infrastructure and operations, finance and resources, and faculty and staff. And we have a communications team providing support to all of them. And this all reports up to a planning oversight committee. All our committees have got faculty representatives, key academic support unit representatives, and some student input. I wanted to ensure that we were fully integrated and we were undertaking planning and operations with a transparent approach. So the makeup of our institution, we're quite diverse. We have a very large health sciences presence. We're integrated in the health system, and we are embedded. The university is linked to one of the big tertiary hospitals in Alberta. And clearly, as you heard from Landa, having worked in the health system, I do have some very good linkages. Before we even came into this pandemic, Alberta public post-secondary institutions were facing a major budget impact due to provincial government-based budget reductions. In the last 7 months, the University of Alberta was cut by 16.9%. That's $110 million. And we've been told to expect another 15% of reductions in the coming 2 years. Manitoba is facing reductions and Saskatchewan also. So we're already in some tough positions before we add on COVID. With public health constraints on gatherings of more than 250 in one place, we suspended classes on March the 13th, and we moved to remote delivery effective March the 17th, which was a massive shift in such a short period. On the following day, it was announced there was a provincial state of emergency, so we moved all of our research to essential research only, which was incredibly challenging, as many of you will understand, given the position and the opinions of researchers. The focus was only on COVID-19 research, as well as ongoing key medical research and anything else deemed essential by individual deans. Our focus, clearly, like everybody else, has been on employee and student safety. We've increased cleaning on key touch points. We've used PPE in very different situations than we normally would. We're trying to maintain the distancing. We're looking at the working alone issue, and we've manufactured hand sanitizer in-house for internal use. A number of our faculties are assisting our health system either with staff, but also with the manufacture of face shields, parts for ventilators, and copious amounts of hand sanitizer to support our first responders. As I said, we've had a very large focus on communications, and as Bill highlighted, it's very key for staff, and certainly in a facilities world, A lot of our staff do not quite understand their role, and with many as English as a second language, it's certainly been challenging. But it's been multifaceted. We've had to look at staff, students, faculty, the Board of Governors, our contractors, alumni, and the public. It's very complex. Financially, we're already in the hole, and we did see some additional costs like many of you, certainly related to IT and overtime and cleaning supplies. Our revenues have been impacted significantly, as Jim highlighted. Our ancillary operations, residences, catering, parking, and bookstore, all seeing massive losses of revenue and ending up refunding revenues to students. A number of our cost recovery clinics, rehabilitation medicine, dental, and other medical clinics have shut and have no revenue to pay staff. Athletics will never be the same again. Our varsity teams are being impacted through loss of revenue from events and from lotteries, and our campus and community recreation facilities are closed without any revenue. And all our summer camps have been cancelled. So what are the impacts on our facilities and space? So on the 24th of March, we took the decision to lock down all of our buildings with the reduced number of people to increase safety and security and allow us to deep clean and then start to wind buildings down to make savings. We turned over our massive indoor athletics facility to Alberta Health Services and quickly converted it into a COVID assessment centre, and now we're transitioning it in case they need it as a secondary treatment centre with 192 beds. Research and medical facility use is still very high, given our ability to respect physical distancing and to support the ongoing health system. So we have had to focus a lot of our resources, both maintenance and janitorial, there. Our classroom and administrative facilities are only operating at about 10 to 15% use, which has helped us. We've closed libraries, but we've maintained access for students to some of our computer labs in limited numbers to allow them to continue remote delivery. We're tracking the use of our buildings and facilities through our building automation systems and Wi-Fi to further refine the use of space and restrict access for operational efficiencies, and to look at, as we move into the summer months, whether we need to get HVAC going, how do we flush our water systems to prevent bacterial growth and keep things safe. We are capitalising on opportunities that reduced activity has brought. So we are looking at maintaining our capital renewal efforts and addressing some of our large deferred maintenance items and functionality that we couldn't get to normally. We have 2 or 3 major large construction projects ongoing, and with physical distancing and use of PPE where appropriate, these are succeeding and are on schedule and still on budget. Sadly, before this happened, we made the decision to reduce our janitorial standards to APA level 4 because of budget cuts, which is clearly not ideal in the face of a pandemic. And that will be a concern for staff and faculty when we get back to some form of normality. For now, we have reduced our custodial coverage. Luckily, we have a mixed contracted and in-house setup, so we have reduced our contracted providers significantly, and we're seeing a high incidence of sickness and absence from in-house resources to about 25% because a lot of people are frightened. We've kept our residences open for those who cannot go home and still have over 1,400 international students living with us, but we did encourage many to leave so we could physically distance those that had to stay. We've provided 1 residence for an at-risk youth centre or home, and another is available to isolate sick essential employees of our own, as well as first responders. Other strategies we've looked at and have implemented, we've negotiated temporary layoff provisions with our non-academic union, and this week I've laid off 160 of my team out of about 1,200, on top of 170 contracted staff who've been laid off. We've already conducted permanent layoffs last year and have another 600 layoffs within the institution scheduled this year because of budget, and sadly they have to move forward. My operations and maintenance team have instigated a Sentinel Walks program to continually patrol our buildings. We have 20,000 square feet, 20 million square feet, so that's no small undertaking. We want to make sure each area is covered every 10 hours to check for security, leaks and other building issues. And we will be running all of our water systems to prevent any possibility of Legionnaire's disease. So our long-term planning, and I'm attacking this from the institutional level, we're well on our way with our full 2020 planning. It's clear that a one-size approach will not fit all across our whole system, nor within a diverse multi-campus and large institution like our own. There are real challenges for health sciences faculties who do need in-person activity for practicums, simulation and other teaching, as well as many of our graduate programs and associated research. 2 weeks ago, we finalised the development of a vision for what we want to achieve in the fall with guiding principles, planning assumptions, and then we agreed on 3 scenarios to detail a plan. Sadly, back to normal is not one of the 3 scenarios. We just do not see it as a realistic option on the 7th of September. Initial work suggests the most immediate decision is around the academic delivery model if we have to stay remote in any sizable way. With a likely requirement to maintain physical distancing, even when some level of in-person activity returns, large classes, particularly first years and some of our engineering ones, will not be possible. There's no way that 450 people in one location is going to be allowed. And with the layout of those big lecture halls, we assess 100 people is probably the most you will get in a 450 person classroom, which is a significant implication. We're now looking at the financial modelling for each of our options or each of our scenarios to assess how bad things could be for us. We're assessing how we can reopen our campuses and facilities in an orderly and safe way with the resources that are available to maintain the critical functions, as staff will continue to be sick or absent. And we're also looking at what permanent changes can we make to help us going forward now that the normal is not the same. On the bright side though, although we announced that our spring and summer semesters will also be delivered remotely with formal assessments, our enrolment is up 10% this year, so there are some positives. So what are the unknowns and concerns that I think we're all going to be looking at for the future? What is the viability of our dormitory-style student residences in the future? This could have massive financial and capacity implications. When there's a vaccine, when will it be available? How available will it be? Will it become mandatory? And if we are to have near normal in-person classes, can and how do we enforce that students and staff need to have the vaccine? And what about the winter semester, so January of 2021? If we're still at some point of major remote in the fall, can we move over Christmas with international borders open again? Is it feasible to bring students from all over the world back into in-person classes? Additionally, as we stay in some form of remote, can we penetrate some countries' firewalls? How do we manage with the multiple time zones we're dealing with when we're delivering remote classes and remote exams? There are multiple challenges. We're hearing in Canada that there could be some stimulus funding for infrastructure, both at the provincial and federal level, and we're certainly ready with some shovel-ready projects to be at the trough. But there are other stimulus funding that's already been announced, has been focused on businesses, not-for-profit entities, and individuals, both private sector and students, but there has been nothing to date for post-secondary institutions. As things start to ease, we know that provincial jurisdictions will open differently, and even in different stages within a province. Alberta is lucky with a low infection rate, 3,720 out of a population of 4.4 million and only 68 deaths. And Edmonton, where the University of Alberta is located, with a population of 1.3 million, has only seen 454 cases and 9 deaths. Will this shift domestic enrolment away from Ontario, where our centre of population is? Will other international students choose safer areas where the infection rates are lower? What will this look like? What about cross-country travel? And when will international borders open? This will all impact our enrolment. Can we resume full in-person classes in January, or are we ultimately looking at September 2021? There are lots of unknowns, and not everything is achievable, but we have to be flexible and we have to be able to pivot at short notice. But at the end of the day, it has to be about the student experience. I'm going to stop there because I know there'll be lots of questions. Thank you very much for today's opportunity to provide a Canadian perspective, and thank you to APA for continuing to put these sessions on.
Terrific, Andrew. Thank you so much. I really liked the comments you made about organizing your response teams and having a broad focus, the decision-making process that you have engaged in, recognizing that staff understanding their roles and complexity, and excuse me, the complexities of balancing both institutional departmental responses and having answers for our people at the same time. And that you closed it out with a series of fantastic questions that people should be asking, and recognizing that it really does have to be about the student experience. We're very, very pleased that you went there. I do have some questions. I have a lot of questions, as a matter of fact. We will see how many we can get to. I had one, Jim, on, and this is going to be interesting. Do we know the number of universities that have already decided to close in the fall of 2020? I know I'm seeing that petering in, but Jim, catch me if I'm wrong here, but I think only a few have announced a fall reopening and many are still waiting and probably waiting until May. What's your thought on that, Jim?
Correct. We're seeing the same. Probably the school that's been most highlighted this week was Southern New Hampshire University, announcing that they would have all online classes for the fall term, and students would be allowed to move back onto campus to have the full student life experience if it was safe for them to move. Safe for them to do so. And you might have also saw that tuition was going to be free for all first-year students as well. So they've probably done the most radical. There are certainly Vanderbilt and a few other of the top-tier institutions have been talking about a scaling process, and they're considering multiple options as they look through. I would say the research institutions are really trying to think through how do they get pieces of their operations up first, and what does that mean then for the implications of their traditional undergraduate or first-year students. But I think as we're looking at the data and hearing from folks that everyone's hoping to wait until July 15th or until June 15th to make that real decision, knowing that they may say we're opening and then changing their mind. But
Okay.
Everyone's trying to hold off as long as possible.
Okay. Yes, and that's what I was seeing as well. So as I consider that, Jim, can you share with us later where you get data on students sort of liking, not liking the online experience? Maybe we can do that offline, and we can get it to people that were asking that question about where is that data regarding the online experience.
Sure.
Okay, excellent, excellent. And you know, I would add to that, folks, on the call, that we all recognize that it might not have been the best because it was a forced online, and I know that all of the institutions are working very hard on the quality of their online delivery. You agree with that statement, Jim?
Absolutely. Some did it very seamlessly because of the strategies that they had in place. Others are still working hard to try to make it work. But I think this will only get better with time. I think more and more faculty training programs are being launched daily, if not weekly. So we will continue to grow into this. I do think the good news is that it will likely create a much more robust face-to-face and online learning experience for our students in future semesters, even if we are back to primarily face-to-face delivery by fall, spring, or a year from fall.
Excellent. That's great. I think that I think as well. Bill and Andrew, I'm going to ask you this. As we experienced a forced shift to online, if you think about post-COVID, how will this paradigm impact the need for physical space, especially with higher education's past desire to build new and expensive buildings? What are you hearing and what are you seeing on your campuses? Jim, you might put a wrapper around that. Bill?
Okay,
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, I can jump in first on that one. You know, Lander, honestly, I think for some of this, it's a little early to tell. We are still expecting some level of student return, and exactly how that will play out is a little bit unclear. For our campus, we have quite a bit of research going on. We're an R1 institution, and you know, students are obviously front and center. But even if the academic delivery looks different from a facilities perspective, a lot of our space use, our maintenance that we're performing, projects that we're undertaking are also very research driven, and that will be, I'll say, on its own independent path from how the learning delivery takes place. So in our case, I'm maybe a little bit optimistic that our campus usage will actually ramp up even concurrently with the way that the learning delivery is evolving over time.
Excellent. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks. I think from the work we've been doing that undergraduates are always going to want to be in person to some extent. And the student experience, I think, has definitely taken a hit with such a rapid move to remote delivery. And I would say some of our instructors are still in denial that this is needed. But we have to use this as a real opportunity, not only to shift our facilities, but to shift the way that education is delivered and that we do assessments. The days of 1800 sat in one location for 3 hours doing an exam time after time, I think is going to be over. I think for us, our focus has very much been on renovation and renewal. I think we have to focus much more on true needs versus academic wants. There are opportunities to reduce space in the future and focus, dwindling resources into fewer but much higher quality and higher functioning spaces, both for delivering perhaps lectures both in person and remotely concurrently, but also for higher quality research areas, but where we have much more shared opportunity.
Very good. That's great. Jim, as you are looking at that, are you seeing this appetite for building new expensive buildings? I know I'm going to anticipate the space discussion targeted topic next Friday. However, you have a different, you're in a catbird seat, are we diminishing that appetite with this reality check here on where we are, or what you're thinking?
I think this has been one of those challenge points of the last 5 years. As many of you probably experienced, presidents and boards love seeing new buildings. There was certainly a philosophy of, always having a construction project was important to showing the campus vitality and life and evolution. I do think Bill is right that the research institutions will continue to see a strong face-to-face experience. I think Andrew is right in that we need to be thinking about repurposing current buildings. How do we repurpose them, make them as useful as possible? But I think what we didn't talk about was what are your campus distinctions and where will you focus on mission and distinction? And what facilities will you have to support that distinctiveness for those of you who are not Research One, large comprehensive institutions? For the others, there's a lot of data suggesting that the Gen Zs want more traditional, lower cost residence halls to lessen their debt. That they're not looking for the lazy river concept that got so much press, even though it was only poor LSU. I loved it. I thought it looked like lots of fun. But there's a balance to all of this, right? There's a balance to it, and I think we'll have to leverage on our strengths to find that balance from a facilities perspective.
Yeah, and I think that is spot on, and the three of you have highlighted the things that you can do to consider that conversation. And I always use the word differentiator. You know, what are your differentiators at your institution that make you different, special, important, and that we may find that we get much tighter and laser focused on those institution by institution. So I'm actually very hopeful about that and think that that is a clear opportunity. I want to go to some infrastructure items. What considerations, think about this, what considerations are you giving to the alterations of existing infrastructure? And some of the examples they said were redesign, HVAC, your whole space utilization. I think that, Andrew, you just spoke to that to a certain degree when you were giving your answer to the last question. There were some other specifics, UV technologies, sensors for detecting VOC, those kinds of things. And maybe the space utilization is space configurations. Any thoughts about those? I'll start with Bill, since Andrew, I think you did a nice job on the answer to the last question, thinking about that. Bill, you want to dive in on that one?
Sure. You know, to me, it depends a little on your angle with infrastructure. When you first say that, I'm thinking about we manage all the infrastructure for steam, electricity, water, you know, all of the delivery to the buildings. Those areas relative to COVID, honestly, I'm not seeing a big change. I think in our case, the question will be, what can we afford to keep doing? So the financial impact will affect our infrastructure, you know, as it relates to getting those utilities up to the building. Within the buildings at the university, we've had a few different scenarios. For example, in our dental clinic, where there were some requests to create negative pressure rooms for temporary use because they were doing different procedures. You know, we're doing a lot of research with COVID-19 right on campus. So we've had quite a number of projects to support short-term needs. And you know, I don't know that we've turned the corner yet on whether those will become long-term needs and if that will then change what we're doing throughout other buildings. We're, of course, looking at ASHRAE and other references to look at what's the best thinking out there today to make sure that we're following along with that. But I'm really not thinking of any other specific changes. You mentioned UV technology. You know, honestly, that's not one that we're looking at yet.
Okay, very good. Andrew, did you want to tackle any of that? Otherwise, I'll go to a question that's sort of a follow-on to that.
Yeah, very briefly, I'd just say we're looking at HVAC. We have a joint research grant with our Faculty of Engineering from the federal government to look at the impacts, particularly as a result of the Crown Princess cruise liner and the sort of the enclosed box. And we are looking at the alternatives in janitorial with UV, just starting to explore those to see if there's an opportunity, particularly in residences, to use a UV type opportunity in our janitorial.
Excellent, excellent. So it ties to that question, and this one is, what are some solutions that you're considering to portray confidence and trust to students and parents for a safe return with respect to, and these were specific about HVAC systems, cleaning, space utilization, space occupancy? I think that each one of you have given us some ideas already. Do you, at this point, have any additions that you want to provide?
So, Landra, I'd just say, you know, one of the challenges is education, and it's going to be difficult. If you take COVID, it's droplet, where H1N1 was aerosol, very different, and your building systems are impacted very differently. We'll certainly be doing another deep clean of everything before we open. So I think it's going to be how we communicate what we've done and what we're doing.
Good, good, excellent.
I would, this is Jim, I would totally agree about the need to communicate and how is that being communicated down to parents, students. I know for some of you at the bigger publics, people are going to say, oh, you know, we don't communicate directly with parents. All those rules are off the table. You've got to be reaffirming the systems. You've got great systems in place now for many buildings and facilities and processes and stuff. Some of it is just communicating it out because it was assumed. Now, how do you reassure them?
That's a great, great point. We do have great systems, and we do have lots of those internal communications, but it's the external now that's going to be critical for us to get out of our closed model and into one that is much more inclusive and engaging. So I want to try to get to a few more questions. And this one is really different. I think it says, did you engage consultants to help frame your changes? If so, how did you justify the cost and then secure the funding? Bill, can I go to you for that one first?
Yes, sure. Let me think just for a minute. I would say no. The University of Minnesota is very comprehensive with the number of programs we offer, engineering schools and medical school across the board. So I think we felt internally we had the expertise that we need without bringing in consultants, from an institutional perspective. When I look at the facilities management department specifically, also we're a very large department with our own engineering internal resources. So we have not brought on consultants. And I will say, typical of most universities, getting input from across the university has not been our challenge. Lots of people want to weigh in and speak up and be involved. So we're getting all kinds of input and have not felt like the cost to bring in consultants was really justified for us.
Very good. Okay. Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah, so we did bring in probably 18 months ago, and they're still working with us, a group called Uniforum. We subscribed. It grew out of Australia and the UK, looking at administrative efficiencies from sort of departments, faculty level, right through central administration. And some of the work they've done has certainly thrown up areas where we didn't know there was a heavy administrative possibility or efficiency. It's not cheap, but it could pay dividends.
Excellent. That's great. So I'll go to a different one that really reflects on the custodial side, and that's given the disinfecting regimens and the community's expectations, it will be difficult in dealing with attrition for budget savings. And so I'm getting a question about that. Bill, I think you specifically talked about that, and that has been a tool in the toolbox. Can you help us think about that one from one of our colleagues who asked that question?
Okay, Lander, I want to make sure I'm answering the question. So it was on the staffing and ability to clean and disinfect spaces. Is that the question?
Yeah, it's about if we say it like custodians may not be the easy attrition group for budget savings because of disinfecting regimens and what the community will expect moving forward. How are you seeing that sort of shifting ground under your feet? So
let me answer you this way. The approach we're planning to take is that we will have kind of a clear documented service level of what people can expect. So whether it's, people are now tuned into what they see on the news and at home and at Home Depot or a restaurant you go to, who's wiping down that outside door handle? Are you cleaning the elevator buttons when the kids, if they do come in back to class or into break rooms or into office settings? What can they expect that's provided by a central group like facilities management, and what is the department responsible to self-perform? So in our case, we are honestly still working on that a little bit, but we are not expecting that we're going to be, doubling and tripling our staffing levels. In fact, they'll be flat or down. So we're going to be expecting, we have a separate group called Office of Classroom Management. They help patrol and manage classrooms. We may have some departmental ownership. There may be roles that students play that people will just have to pitch in a little bit, because we won't have an army of people to go in and wipe down a room every hour. We do know the importance of the perception of seeing people out cleaning, so we'll make sure that we have folks on campus who are very visual so you can see what we're doing. But the approach we're taking is it's going to be a little bit more of a community effort, and I'm happy to say that the departments we've spoken to are on board with that. They understand the limitations, they understand the high expectation for cleaning and sanitizing, and they're willing to pitch in. So at least in our case, We just have to explain what are the rules, what are the expectations, and let folks know they have a part, and we're seeing them step up. So that's the approach we're taking.
Excellent. That really does clarify, I think, for folks to understand the service levels themselves and the expectation, and that's clearly what we've been trying to do overall. In addition, that perception and visual, that the visual of them being there. Jim, do you see the crisis, this crisis stalling sustainability?
The students sure hope not. They're looking to be a part of the solution. I think even the stuff, Bill, you were just talking about, I think educating and training students, they want to be a part of these solutions. They are more health conscious. They are more aware. I think that we'll see it continue to expand even more, because this is really high on their priority list. And I do think this is the unintended consequence of these things, of some of these calls to action, of energy consumption, less energy consumption, more conservation efforts, more things I think will come. And this aligns much with what the Gen Zs are talking about, wanting to be a part of.
That's perfect. And I want to honor Earth Day yesterday. And as a matter of fact, everybody should have noted that the Earth was much happier yesterday. We may not have been, but if you saw any news on it, it was amazing. Smog levels down. I mean, so many things that were a positive regarding planet Earth. So if we don't recognize that we have an impact, that gave us some clear baseline data. I do want to identify for someone. They asked about Bill's, what he was using to analyze the situation. He's using the Kaplan-Norton model. It is a balanced scorecard model and method. And you can Google that, and we will certainly make this entire conversation available as a recording. And also, if Bill and Andrew, you have your comments even written in sort of a, I know that you do, in a Word kind of document, I could do a quick cleanup, because people would really like to have that in addition to the recorded session. So just let me know if you'll be okay with that. And let's see,
Sure.
I think, yes, and that sort of takes us to, we really don't have any more time for questions, and we have more questions, and we will, remember, every week, the questions that we get, we answer all of them. We go research them before you get them back. They're usually up by Wednesday, unless I haven't done my work, because the staff are certainly doing theirs. So I want to move to a close. It is amazing that what this team has provided in terms of the wealth of information. It is, again, available as a recording. All the questions will be answered. We'll get you those documents. The slides will be made available as well. So I wanted to comment as we go to close that Grounds Landscaping Operations survey, we had over 800 of you responded. Our staff have updated the infographic. It is absolutely fantastic. And we have prepared a cogent summary. It's beautifully laid out your detailed responses. They are now live on the website. You click on COVID-19 related surveys and responses. You'll want to read through your colleagues' emerging practices. Again, please don't hesitate to tell us how we can help, and we'll see if we can't respond as quickly as you are having to on your campuses. These surveys are invaluable. I do want to reflect the slide on a call for images. We are looking for those images to post on the website, a la COVID-19 and the work that you're doing. Folks are saying they really appreciate those. There's a slide now on a save the date and next week's topic, space, a very new frontier. And my final remarks, they're brief. Amidst all the possible setbacks and harsh realities we are facing, I want to highlight a few lyrics from the song Alicia Keys debuted last night called Good Job. It speaks to those providing the vital link for our very survival. We could not do social physical distancing without the services provided by those on the front line. The chorus goes like this. You're doing a good job, doing a good job. Don't get too down. The world needs you now. Know that you matter, matter, matter. Well, you are my front line. You matter. Thanks all of you, and have a wonderful weekend. Bye.